How do you press start? Sorry. Okay.
Okay, Rabbi.
There was a foreign minister who worked for Stalin, a Russian foreign minister. His name was Molotov. This reporter saw this Molotov, his last name, sounds like a cocktail. He was working for Stalin, and he made a call to Stalin overseas. And a reporter saw him talking to Stalin, and he says, "Yes, Comrade Stalin, yes, Comrade Stalin." And then all of a sudden he says, "No, no, 1,000 times no, Comrade Stalin." And the reporter is like, "Wow." And then he finishes the call, "Yes, Comrade Stalin." And then the reporter is like, it's like a gold mine. Like, wow, he's disagreeing with Stalin. No, Stalin is the boss. So he says, I overheard you say that no to Stalin. Could I ask you what that was about? It's like trying to hold his excitement. The Molotov's very, looks him with these frigid Russian eyes. He says, Stalin asked me if I disagreed with anything. So I said, no, 1,000 times no. And then he asked me if I understood. Okay, so there are, in this week's Torah portion, items that it says Moshe Rabbeinu did not understand. He had such a hard time understanding these items that it says that he asked Hashem again and again until he couldn't do what Hashem asked him to do, and Hashem had to do it for him. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, to make a golden menorah. And the menorah had to be made out of one solid piece of gold. And it was so difficult to make out of one solid piece because the menorah is very intricate. The design of the menorah was 5 feet tall, and there was designs of flowers, designs of buttons. Such an intricate piece of art. So Moshe Rabbeinu had no idea how we're supposed to make this out of one solid piece of gold. Another item were the silver trumpets. Torah says later on, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to make silver trumpets. And these trumpets were used to call people together. They're used to on the holidays, to blow it on the holidays. In times of trouble, we also blow these trumpets as part of our prayers. So these silver trumpets also have to be made out of a solid piece of silver. Another item discussed early on in the Torah was the cheruvim. On top of the ark, there were these golden cherubs. They're angel-like images, which had the faces of children. The Torah says that also these cheruvim, they also have to be made out of a solid piece of gold. And again, it says Moshe Rabbeinu did not understand how this was possible, and it says that Moshe Rabbeinu threw the gold in the fire, according to one interpretation, and it formed by itself. According to another midrashic interpretation, the menorah actually descended from heaven. But the question is, why these three? Of all the things that were made in the temple, this wasn't the only things that were made out of metal. There was the altar. There were many other items besides the altar, the table, that were made out of metal and out of gold. And yet, they didn't have to be out of a solid piece of gold. So what's the reason why these items, which are the most intricate, the hardest to make out of gold, why do they have to make it made out of gold? Especially the word miksha, which means solid piece, also could be constructed to make two words. Some commentaries say miksha means min kasher. It's impossible. It's too hard to make it out of one solid piece. So these three items are made out of one solid piece to give us a message about three important parts of our life. The menorah, which shines its light not just in the temple, but it says the menorah its light went outside the temple. In the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, there were these windows that they were narrower in the inside. The thickness of the window was narrow on the inside, and then as it went through the wall of the temple, it was wider, because the role of menorah was to give its light to the outside world. In fact, a miracle happened every day with the menorah, not just, the famous story of Hanukkah, where it lasted for 8 days, but in the temple, every day a miracle happened. The miracle was that one candle will last for 24 hours. Ordinarily, the candles were made to last for 12 hours, maximum, and one candle lasted for 24 hours. So it says in the Talmud that the purpose of the menorah was to give light to the whole world as a sign that God is with the Jewish people. So the menorah represents leadership. Its glow, its light, its shine represents leadership. The cheruvim, the cherubs, the golden cherubs which had the face of children, that represents education. As Meir Shapiro says, it was made out of gold, because for education you have to give your best. A lot of parents, they have a hard time investing in their own children education because they have so many. It's not so cheap to send your kids to a Jewish school. But Meir Shapiro said the Torah tells us right in the beginning of our being a people that the cherubs are made out of gold. To have education, you have to have gold. But here the Torah emphasizes the second point, which is not just out of gold, solid gold. What's the idea of solid gold? What is the connection between education and a solid piece?
What did you say, Rabbi, about the narrower and wider?
That the menorah's light, usually a window, our windows are just a thin piece of glass. In those days, a window meant that through the wall, right, it was, the window narrowed in the outside of a home to let the light in, and in the inside of the home, the window was wider to make the light spread in the home. But in the Beit HaMikdash, the window was narrower on the inside, and as it went through the wall, it got wider. Because the role of the window in the temple was to let the light shine to the outside.
Oh, okay, got it.
So, what's the message we have about these three items? The menorah, the cherubs, and the trumpets. Why do they have to be made out of gold? These three things represent leadership. The menorah is leadership. The cherubs are education. And the trumpets, which are blown on happy occasions, represent happiness. And there's three different, for these three things, we need to have solid wholesomeness. Let's talk first of all about education. Children cannot really thrive in an environment which has ambivalence, which has inconsistency, which has hypocrisy. For a child to be educated, the child has to have a holistic message. There has to be a harmonious, truly unified message. A child can't really learn anything if his parents are saying one thing and doing something else. As one child says, what you're doing is so much louder to me than what you're saying. In order for a child to learn anything from the parents actually have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. The parents can't give it one message to their children and not do the same thing themselves. Like one educator said, the hardest thing that parents experience is that they want their children to go in their ways, but unfortunately the children are not going in their ways. And he said the reason for this is very simple. He says parents, let's say they spend $25,000 a year to send their kids in a Jewish school. Then they go on vacation on Passover to Disneyland. And they ask, and the Disneyland, there's the one price for 11-year-olds and one price for 7-year-olds. So how old are you? Tell them you're 7. Tell them you're 7. And so the parents, to get a $100 discount in Disney World, they threw out a $25,000 education. They spent more than that just for 1 year. So not just the children need this in their parents' message, but also the relationship between the parents is a very, very strong thing. When children live in a secure environment, the parents get along. Children are very sensitive to dissonance and fragmentation between the parents themselves. There was this child. He goes to a class and he hands he's from a rich kid from a rich family, and he didn't study for the test. So he hands his test to the teacher, and he puts a $100 bill in the test, and he says $1 for every point. The teacher hands it back, the test the next day, with $56 in change. It's not he got a 48, 44 in the test. So the key to educating children, the Torah says, the cherubs they were made of one solid piece. You can't educate children without that. The parents have to be together as well. There was a exchange that I had with someone about the need for parents to get along, which went something like this. And I hope I'm not misquoting. This is the way I heard it. You know the story of King Solomon with the two women arguing about who was the mother of the baby? And one said, I'm the mother of the baby. The other one said, I'm the mother of the baby. And they go to King Solomon, and King Solomon says, let's split up the baby. Let's cut the baby in half. Remember that story? And so the real mother is like, no, she could have the baby. And the one who was pretending to be the mother says, no, it's okay. Cut him in half. It's okay. No one should get the baby. So King Solomon knew that the real mother was the one who said, don't cut the baby. And everyone's impressed by King Solomon's wisdom, but the truth is, it's not such a big deal. Obviously, the one who's not the real mother is betraying herself by saying, cut the baby in half. She's betraying herself. What kind of mother would say cut the baby in half? It's ridiculous. So there's a deeper message here. When parents live together with their children, so the parents have, besides the responsibility of educating their children, they also have a great value for themselves. I'm a father. I'm mated in life. I have my children. So when parents split up, chas v'shalom, they get divorced, so there's a lot of arguments between parents about who gets custody. And sometimes a parent may want to have custody, not because of the benefit of the child, but just because a parent wants to have ownership, to feel like I'm a person, therefore I'm a father, I'm a mother, and therefore I want the child to be by me. What happens to the child then? The child is 1 week by his dad and 1 week by his mom, and the father is happy and the mother is happy. What about the kid? Sometimes the kids grow up, sometimes they have 2 sets of clothing. They have 1 set of clothing when they're by the mom, and 1 set of clothing when they're by the dad. And it goes on, and they have so many different things in each place, and they get fragmented. And sometimes it's better, for the sake of the child, to give up your right in court of what you own for in your child's heart and mind, for the sake of the wholesomeness of the child. That's what King Solomon meant when he said, let's see the real mother stand up. Who wants to cut the baby in half? Who wants to have the baby for a day and doesn't care about the baby's own psychological state? I'm not talking about a scenario where one of the parents is abusive or whatever, and you're afraid it's going to happen. But when you know it's better for your child to be, I know someone who, long story short, he didn't contest at all for altruistic reasons. He didn't contest at all his wife's right to the children for anything, because he knew that him being in their life would be bad for them. I'm not going to get into the details. You could argue about it without knowing the details, but I think it was actually a very good decision, and it was a very selfless decision. He's starting to think of the benefit of the children, not for his benefit. I want to be their father. I want to connect with them. I want to talk to them. It wouldn't be good for them. So that's the first message the Torah tells us, that in order for children to learn something, you have to have wholesomeness. Unlike Yankel goes to a psychiatrist and he says, I have a split personality. Okay. And so I need to get a discount. There's me, and then there's me, and then there's me. All 3 of us, we got a group discount, right? Jews. That's chutzpah. Anyway, so shalom bayis, peace at home, is the strongest message that children need. When there's peace between the parents, there's the strongest message, with the strongest message to the child. Unlike the military class, where the teacher was getting disturbed, trying to ask the class to explain. They heard what he said. Do you understand the difference between an engagement and a battle? And it's not for this discussion. It's too negative. We will move on. Engagement when the war starts, the battle happens afterwards, right? Okay, anyways, moving on. So when you get married, that's in the real battle. That's the joke. Moving on. Okay, sorry about that. So let's go now to leadership. Leadership is a similar thing. It says in the Talmud, the generation that will greet Mashiach, they have a deficiency. Their face of the generation is like the face of a dog. Why is it like the face of a dog? When a dog runs, it looks back to see if its master is following it. A lot of leaders, Jewish leaders, they're not really leaders. They just look at whatever else people are telling them to do, and they want to follow people are telling them. They're a fair weather fan flipper. They do whatever people tell them to do. You can't have leadership if you don't have integrity. If you don't really believe what you're doing. If you want to start a school, so Yankel's going to tell you, you're crazy. How can you start a school? It's impossible. You can't start a school. You're out of your mind. And another guy says, yeah, you could do it. You walk into a haunted house in one of those amusement parks. One of the mirrors says to you that you're fat. One mirror says you're skinny. One mirror says there's 5 of you. In order to be a leader, to carry something from start to finish, you have to have integrity. You have to really 100% be there. That's why my colleagues, who the Rebbe sent 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, to Timbuktu and to Bangkok and to Argentina and to Brazil and to who knows where, to Adelaide, Australia, these small towns in the middle of nowhere, and how they stayed there, how they survived there. They were made of one piece. They believed in one God, gave us one Torah, and there's one world created by one God, by divine providence, and therefore all different things that came their way, they were able to weather the storms because they were made of one piece. That's the second message the Torah tells us. For the sake of leadership, you have to be made of one piece. That's the meaning of the Menorah being made of one piece. And there's a third message. Third message is happiness. The trumpets represent happiness. What's the meaning of how do you achieve happiness? So the world will tell you To have dignity, you need to have 5 things to have dignity. You need to have money, you need to have fame, you need to have status, you need to have an education, and if you have all these things, then you're going to be accepted and you'll have dignity. But and you have to have influence. You have to have influence. But all those things are external. They're all external. They don't really give you anything inside you. There was a great chassid. His name was Mendel Futafas. He was a legendary chassid. He was imprisoned for spreading Torah in Soviet Russia, and he was once talking with his other co-prisoners in the Gulag. And Yankel used to be a writer, and Shmerel used to be a teacher, and Laser was an engineer, and now they're all together in the Gulag. They're all in the same place. They're all stuck over there, and they're all crying. Each of them is saying their story of their life before, and they're all crying. Why they're crying? Because look who we used to be now, look who we are now. And Mendel wasn't crying. So one of the guys like, how come you're not upset? Aren't you upset? You were also something else before you came in prison. He said, listen, I am upset. I have a wife, I have children. It bothers me that I can't be with them. But I didn't lose my identity. My identity wasn't what I did. Mendel was a businessman before he was arrested. He was spreading Torah also. Before, I was a servant of Hashem, and now I'm also a servant of Hashem. Doesn't change. My identity doesn't change. So in order to have happiness, none of the things that we think will give us happiness are not going to give us happiness. Our happiness comes from our wholesomeness. Our wholesomeness means that our epicenter, the deepest part of ourselves, we realize, Ani lo nivreti el l'shamash eshkoni. I was not created for any other reason but to serve Hashem. That sense of I was created just to serve Hashem, that's what gives us